Well, good day. My name is Bill Humber. Welcome to another season of our Green Citizen videos. And today we have a wonderful topic that we're going to explore with our esteemed visitor, Dr. Irvin Studin, not only of the University of Toronto, but also a teacher in Russia and Kiev. And that's around the proposition, the idea, I suppose the eventual policy, that Canada should grow to become a country somewhere in the order of 100 million people. Irvin, what's the essence of the story, for want of a better term?
Well, the short story is that Canada is at 36 million after a wonderful 150-year history. The long story, Bill, and thank you for the opportunity to address it with you today, is whether Canada could and should arrive at a population of about 100 million by century's end, if we are around. Big if. My hope is that we will be around and will be one of the major players, indeed a healthy country and stable internally and very significant internationally. But 100 million has two aspects to it. The first is metaphorical. The second one is a policy story. The metaphor says whether we are a country of 70 million or 120, it doesn't matter, but what matters is whether we have the mentality of a country of 100 million. Can we see ourselves psychologically as a first-order country, a builder rather than a country that works on the terms of the builders? If you were to use a sports analogy, a hockey player in international affairs. Hockey players are of a different order psychologically, but we don't find them in any other aspect of Canadian society. We don't find them in business, we don't find them in science, we don't find them in culture, we don't find them in the book world and literature, we don't find them in politics and geopolitics. Can we be hockey players psychologically by the end of this century? And that is Canada at 100 million metaphorically. In policy terms, there's a domestic story, there's an international story. Domestically, at 100 million, we will have all the institutions of a country that is territorially the second largest in the world, but that doesn't have a sufficiently large and dense population to build those institutions. Institutions like large markets that afford us huge and innovative companies. We have only a handful of world-beating companies. We should make this more the law than the exception. Sports leagues, to use my favorite analogy. We have no sports leagues. We have annexed teams in American sports leagues. We call that a job well done. Why don't we have our National Hockey League? We don't have a National Baseball League. We don't have a National Volleyball or Basketball or Baseball League. We have annexed projects, and the same repeats itself in commerce, it repeats itself in culture. Internationally, however, in policy terms, we will have a much more difficult century, Bill, this century. We've had 150 years of peace. This is a century in which China, all of a sudden, is central in world affairs again. It's never been central in Canadian history. After the Opium Wars that saw China depressed, Canada was confederated. So we have a new China that's back at the fore. We have an Arctic border with Russia. Russia's a major country. We have America to our south, which will be less important, but still important. So we have complicated borders, we have pressures, we have the Arctic melting, we have changes in technology. It will be difficult for Canada to survive and sit on its laurels strategically for another 100 years unless we play at a high level. And 100 million, both in population and metaphorical terms, will allow us to hopefully succeed and survive and play at that first-order standard.
Now, you mentioned the Arctic, and we know that it's a melting area. We know that that's associated with changes in the climate. We know that Canada has at times tried to play a role with climate change, and at other times has deferred from that role. What do you see as the environmental benefits of 100 million? Because many people will think, well, 100 million, the draw on resources, the draw on fresh water, a lot of other things will be threatened by such a growth in even a country the size of Canada.
Mm-hmm. Of course, if one takes an unimaginative or a base view of 100 million, the simplest thing you could say is that everyone will come to Toronto and the metro system won't be able to handle them. The Gardiner will need renovation. The streets will be dirtier. Crime will be higher. The greenhouse gas footprint will be more significant. But this is completely unimaginative and, dare I say, ahistorical. I'm arguing for 100 million population that is well spread across the country. There'll be many Torontos. There'll be 4 or 5 by the end of the century. We should deliberately spread the population. But in terms of the environment as such, evidently people will eat more, they will consume more water. But in the same breath, we will have greater companies. We have more innovation. We'll have more competition. We'll have bigger markets. We will have companies that will change the world and our own country in environmental terms. New technologies, new innovations. These will come from the strange brew of a larger population with a different mentality that says the environment is a priority. We're a country that's the most beautiful on earth. We have an environmental heritage from the Aboriginals and our forebears. Let's innovate. And we cannot innovate with sufficient quality and muscle today because we have an insufficient population and densities to do that. We don't have the right mentality. Internationally, we'll pack a much larger punch at 100 million. We will generate perhaps more greenhouse gases, but we'll be able to change the terms of the international debate because we're a much larger country, more sophisticated, larger economy, larger diplomatic force, and the mentality will be different.
We currently have about half of 1% of the world population, just over 35 million in a world of 7 billion people. We're projecting in the next half century, possibly the world population growing to 10 billion, of which, given some of this discussion, we could grow to 100 million. That would still make us only 1% of the world population. Is that enough to have an impact in the world?
It's a great question. I think that at 100 million, given, if population projections are more secure than economic projections, and who knows where the world will be in 2100, Canada will be the second most important country in the West, in the Western space at 100 million. Will, of course, not be anywhere near China or India or some of the larger Southeast Asian or African countries, but will be larger than any country in Europe, including Germany, France, and the UK. Can we imagine ourselves psychologically bigger than France and the UK? This is a foreign concept to the Canadian brain today, but we will be. And we'll be almost as big as Russia, if not larger. And I always tell my Russian colleagues they have poor census makings. They don't really know what their population will be, so we'll just say we're bigger. But we will be the biggest in Europe. We'll be second to the United States in population. They'll keep growing quite a bit. It'll be an attractive place to live. Second biggest country in the West, packs a big psychological and factual punch in world affairs.
I'm truly excited by having our own national sports leagues. That plays into one of my tremendous fascinations as well. But I think what you're saying is that would not just apply to sports. That applies right across the spectrum in culture, in media, in a whole bunch of places that we so take for granted now that we're second in call to the United States. I think what you're suggesting is we could be a leader in this space just in North America itself.
That's right. There's an interesting paradox in the hockey mentality. Whereas I say Canada creates Gretzky's and Lemieux's and Crosby's and John Tavares and Eric Lindros, Guy Lafleur. These are first-order warriors, and they don't repeat themselves in any other facet of Canadian life. The same with the women, Haley Wickenheiser and company, first-order Canadians. This doesn't happen in business, this doesn't happen in science. There's a paradox in hockey, however. Whereas our players are first order, strategically on the organizational side, we're still colonial. Now, how is it that the NHL commissioner, who is non-Canadian and a non-hockey person, residing in New York, essentially has a veto power over Canada's prospects of playing or not playing in the Olympics, which is the only national forum that binds the country psychologically? This is ridiculous. This is a colonial position, which the Prime Minister says, I hope that the NHL Commissioner will agree to allow NHL players to play in the Olympics. We're in a colonial posture, whereas we should be saying we provide the majority of the hockey players, we provide the majority of the talent, the majority of the fanship, and this is important for us. We have our own leagues, we control the terms, and we're playing in the Olympics because we're the defending champs and we are a hockey country. Can we imagine ourselves then replicating this in the other spheres of life? We will be a very major country, and I think we will change the world for the better.
I think one of the great ironies, too, and maybe I'll conclude on this note, environmentally, the more people you have, the more people living in different places, the more concern and the more interest they have in the quality of their natural world, even of their built environment as well. So it is one of the great kind of realities of North America that it's the cities that care most about the environment in many ways, and in many ways that would be an added bonus for Canada to have more people living in cities.
I agree. And I always like to say, let's look at public transport. I was just lecturing to a wonderful delegation of Chinese public and business leaders. And they've built high-speed rail across the entire eastern seaboard of China over the last 10 years with great speed and great seriousness, now into the inland. They are obsessed with the environment today in a way that's far more serious than Canada. And when the Chinese mean business, they mean business. I mean, whether they succeed is a different question. We don't have to like their political system. We have to admire their can-do attitude, their seriousness. Now, where is Canada's high-speed rail? We have the second biggest territory on Earth, and high-speed rail is probably a more efficient way than car or even train. Or high-speed than car or plane for traveling between Toronto and Montreal, or between Toronto and other centers. Where is it? We wait for the first one to be built. And 100 million people will allow us to have the density, but also the mentality to do these things on a regular basis in the service of the environment.
And can-do is so close to Canada. Irvin, thank you very much
Thanks for having
this.
me, Bill.